and Chase Harper on October 28, 1969, in Claremont, California, on the outskirts of Los Angeles. He has two brothers, Joel and Peter. I always feel bad for the brothers of guys like this, right? Like, yeah, I'm Joel, I'm Peter Harper. Ben Harper? Yeah, Ben Harper, right? Like, they're always sort of the lost ones. When Ben was a child, his parents divorced, but they encouraged him anyways. Like, both his parents were still completely involved in his life. They didn't sort of step aside or anything like that. They really, really encouraged his creativity. And so he remembers that when he was a kid, he was allowed to paint whatever he wanted to. And so at times he'd paint the grass purple and paint the sun blue, and they'd go, "That's great, it's just the way it looks," right? And sort of encouraged him on in his creativity. After dating for several years, he and Laura Dern got married on December the 23rd, 2005, and they have two children together. He gained a real love for music as he was working in his maternal grandfather's music shop. They would bring in these instruments, and he would be sitting there, and he's really, really young, and his grandparents would let him fix these instruments as they came in. And so what he would do is he'd fix it as quick as he could so that he could try it out. And he kept trying all these different instruments. And finally, he just got bored of trying different instruments and really wanted to just play something. And so by the time he was 6, so he's already been working in his maternal grandparents' shop, and by the time he's 6, he starts taking guitar lessons and starts working out how to play the guitar. He began playing it, and then he sort of remembers combining sort of folk music with reggae, with R&B, with a little bit of rock, and just sort of reached out to all these different things. And I would suggest that by the shirt he was wearing in the video we were wearing, he even went into country western a little. But he sort of does all of these mixes and puts it all together and becomes this phenomenal guitar player. His music is often described as sort of soft and soothing, and the sound of it may well be, but the lyrics aren't at all. He's a man who puts great depth into his lyrics, spends all kinds of time in his writing, because he doesn't want to just sort of say fluff, but he wants to talk into people's lives and say something. Within his lyrics, they're very seldom preachy, but there's always this sort of distinct spirituality in almost everything that he writes. He's one of those ones that when I sat down to write this message and knew that I had to pick a few songs and sort of look at things, there's way too many songs to choose from because he's just spiritual all over the place. Just sees God in all kinds of things in this world and speaks about it and brings it out to real life. He has a really, really clear call for the care of the marginalized in this world. He sees all kinds of people being hurt and kept down and thinks that it has to change. And doesn't just think it has to change, but sort of impels people to make it change, compels them to get out there and do something about it. As far as spirituality goes, he makes no commitment to any particular religion. He, in fact, doesn't really like religion much. He instead has allowed people to sort of shape his faith. And he says readily that the people that have had the most impact on him in shaping his faith is this group called the Blind Boys of Alabama. The Blind Boys of Alabama are kind of an interesting band. They started in 1939, and they've had an impact on this young guy, right, who's only 38 years old. And these guys started to talk to him about their faith in Jesus and their understanding of the gospel, and that we need to bring that out. So from 1939 to now, they still have two of the original band members are still part of this band that recorded with Ben Harper recently. A quick look at the lyrics of Harper's songs lets you in on his passion for the poor and the marginalized. He's this guy who sort of says one thing and then tries to live it out. He's sometimes political, but more often than not, it's because he's seen a social injustice happening, and he doesn't think that anybody can sit idly by when you see these things happening. When Katrina happened, he was one of the ones who sort of critiqued the way that the United States was dealing with it, that people that were poor weren't being cared for the way they should. But at the very same time, he's also concerned about inner city Los Angeles and inner city New York and inner city Chicago, where the same stuff is happening. It's just not sort of on the scale of what happened with a hurricane. In the song Picture of Jesus, he speaks of the photos that we keep of Jesus. You know the ones that you have up on your wall where Jesus looks like he might be a little bit Swedish, or you might carry them in your wallet, or wherever it might be. He talks about those and says, you know, it's nice that we have those pictures, but big deal. Instead, we need to recognize that we have these walking pictures of Jesus all around us. And one of those walking pictures of Jesus that he sees is Martin Luther King Jr. and the way that he carried himself. That Martin Luther King Jr. was in fact one of these walking pictures of Jesus. that, this reverend tried to live it out and spoke truth and was killed for the truth. And a fear that Ben Harper sort of recognizes is this fear that as humanity, we're sort of afraid to speak the truth, and says instead that we ought to just rest safely in the arms of Jesus, knowing that we're going to be cared for, and knowing that even in his death, Martin Luther King Jr. was cared for by that sort of soulful arms of Jesus wrapped around him. When Harper is asked about religion, he doesn't hold back, but responds in this way. I love this. This is his take on religion. There's no room in my life for religion. Religion is separation and segregation of God. How can you segregate the Almighty? And so, knowing what we do about his story with the blind boys of Alabama and him writing all these songs about Jesus, he doesn't necessarily have a problem with Jesus. Doesn't have a problem with sort of following Jesus even. But it's the religion part of it, that when we start to sort of compartmentalize God, that when we do this segregation of God, and I think that we're guilty of it, that we segregate the Almighty. We take him and we go, he is the God of taking care of people and making them prosperous, right? We see that on TV sometimes. Or he's the God of social justice. Or he's the God of caring for this. Or the God of miracles and wonders. And instead of us realizing that he's the God of all of those, we sometimes compartmentalize that. And Ben Harper recognizes that and sort of calls us on it. And says that if that's what we're going to do with God, he doesn't want any part of that kind of a religion. In examining Harper's life through songs, as stated before, we find this deeply spiritual man. He doesn't hold back. He sort of talks about everything in his life being driven by this deep spirituality. That he loves describing himself as spiritual, like that's his thing. And I think that there's a lot of people in our world that like to describe ourselves as spiritual, because there's something about that, this understanding that there's stuff beyond our sort of physical world, that's this deep spirituality that we realize makes us more complete as a human being. And he recognizes that. And when he's asked about this spirit side of his life, he quickly responds with this sort of description of how he tries to live. The Spirit is what guides my life, and I'm humbly on my knees in thanks for guidance and direction every day. But God is not something to be preached. It's something to be lived. Interesting. Because that's something that Jesus said. That Jesus very clearly made it known to his followers who were with him in his last days after he had died and then he was resurrected, and he's visiting with his disciples and his followers and talking to them and saying to them, here's the deal. I'm going to be leaving, but don't worry. I'm leaving my Spirit with you. And my Spirit is going to be the thing that guides you. My Spirit is the thing that you need to lean on. My Spirit is the thing that's going to sort of show you the way in this life and help you to become more like me. Jesus promised that his Spirit would be there to guide us and more importantly, to change us over time. Sometimes slowly, sometimes drastically, but it was going to change us. That we were going to be different people, becoming more and more like Jesus, the person whom we're striving to follow. That when we sort of lean on that Spirit side of our lives, when we've sort of engaged with this calling of Jesus to be in relationship with him, and that we start to become more like him, that his Spirit is in fact the one that brings about that change. Ben Harper, when he says he doesn't think that God is something to be preached but something to be lived, is so very true. And I think that there's a lot of people around us who sort of talk about Jesus. And they say that they even know what Jesus would want us to do, but we don't actually do it. And there aren't a whole lot of us that are actually living it out, at least not to the degree that we could. That we aren't really becoming more and more looking like Jesus and actually living it out.